All right. Good morning again, everybody. We're back for a part two interview with Andrii Telizhenko. And with this part of the interview, we're going to go through a timeline of the Viktor Shokin firing, where I mean the impeachment was basically based off Trump wanting Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden's involvement in pressuring Petro Poroshenko to fire Viktor Shokin. And since we have an expert witness here, Andrii Telizhenko actually worked for Viktor Shokin. We're going to get his insights on the timeline of the firing. Was it because he was investigating Burisma and Hunter Biden, et cetera? And Hans, I'm going to pitch it to you to go through this timeline, I guess.
Sure. I think we could probably start in 2014. So there was a sort of Shokin was not the prosecutor general yet, and in fact, one of the issues here that's sort of often forgotten is that Shokin was retired at that time. And he probably lived happily somewhere, and he was brought back in to fix things. So this is sort of the one of the things that you never hear in the media, that this wasn't some up and coming guy, corrupt guy who was going to come in and take all the money. He was retired. He was brought back in to fix things. But I want to start in 2014 because this is before he was brought back. This is when he was not in charge. He was not the he was not the prosecutor general. Because something happened in 2014, late 2014, that the impeachment people, George Kent and the ambassador Pyatt and so on, keep sort of harking back to that as somehow evidence that Shokin did something wrong. So what happened is that Burisma had some of its money frozen in a London bank account, and there was a case in London where Burisma was trying to unfreeze it, and the prosecutors were trying to hold it there because supposedly the money was embezzled, in the Ukraine. So under various banking laws, it was supposed to be held there. Now, I read that judgment in the UK very carefully, and the judge blames it on the UK authorities because he basically says they produced a bunch of conjecture, and conjecture is not a suitable standard for holding the money there. So the money was released. Okay, so it went back to Burisma, and that's what got people like Pyatt and George Kent and so on very upset. And somehow that was then tied to Shokin after the event. So when you hear about the impeachment testimony and so on, somehow that's Shokin's fault, and the media obviously picked up that narrative as well. So let's start with that. Was that Shokin's fault that the money got released in London?
No, Shokin at that time was just brought in a couple months prior as the deputy prosecutor general, and he did not oversee any Burisma activity or any Burisma cases within his framework as working as a deputy prosecutor. You're right, he was on retirement, and then he was brought in as experienced prosecutor who worked for more than 40 years in the prosecutor office, and they needed his experience. And when that London case was dropped and the money was released, he was not the prosecutor general. He only comes in as prosecutor general in February. The money is released within December, January 2014-15, and he comes in February 2015 as a prosecutor general. A month something afterwards, this happens in London. So he physically was not even capable to get involved or was involved in such interaction or transaction between the London prosecutors and the Ukrainian prosecutors, because he did not oversee that.
Right, and then he came in. He became the prosecutor general, as you say, February 2015.
Yes.
He only lasted for about a year. So maybe something that struck me in terms of that, before we get back to sort of the timeline, is that George Kent himself. So George Kent was the charge d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine. So essentially, he was the guy who was running the show over there. And so when it came to Shokin's successor, I know I'm kind of skipping ahead, but I think it's important to mention it at this point. When it came to Shokin's successor, George Kent was making excuses about, no progress on corruption or whatever. He says, oh, the guy's only been there for a year. The guy's only been there for 2 years. You can't turn the ship around so quickly and so on. But somehow all of those excuses didn't apply to Shokin. So I think that's important to sort of get that out, because for whatever reason, Shokin had to go. And I'm just trying to kind of really drill down on that point. What was the reason? So from reading about it, I think if we just leave Biden out for a moment, there did seem to be this movement to get rid of Shokin, and it seems to be it started with the NGOs, ANTAC, and so on. Did you have any idea why they were so dead set on getting rid of this guy?
They were trying to get rid of him because he started to investigate and wanted to investigate where were their funds coming from, how were they financed, was it legal by any law, and if there's finance from abroad, why they're influencing internal Ukrainian politics. Basically, what the U.S. is accusing me of, without me being even financed, but these guys are being financed from abroad, not only from the United States, but different other organizations, European, Canadian, etc., and basically influencing under the guidance of their finances, politics within Ukraine, protesting, organizing physical protesters, etc., and blocking the government work. So Mr. Shokin just started to investigate why are these guys doing, why are they involved that much, and they started going after him online, protesting, etc., trying to basically destroy his reputation, and they know how to do it better than a government office because they have the new high-tech social media backing, and compared to Ukrainian bureaucracy and government, they know how to do it best, and they help them a lot in destroying Mr. Shokin's reputation.
Now that makes
because, and I want to add, what I remember also is Mr. Shokin in summer of 2015 has a correspondence with Ambassador Pyatt and Secretary of State John Kerry, and they have no issues with him in summer 2015. They write a letter that he's well-respected prosecutor, that he's doing anti-corruption work pretty well, and they have no issues with him in the summer of 2015. And there's official letter correspondence between the prosecutor's office, Ambassador Pyatt, and Secretary of State John Kerry, which support Shokin's work.
Right, and Pyatt's so Pyatt was the ambassador back, the U.S. ambassador in the Ukraine back then. So Pyatt's timeline on Twitter is also interesting because throughout 2015 he seems to paint a picture where progress is being made. I mean, his New Year's message 2015-16 is, wow, what a great year of progress. And, you know, and we're talking specifically about the corruption issue. And it's so weird that at exactly the same time while he's saying that on Twitter, there's this move to get rid of the guy. What you said just now makes so much sense about why these NGOs were so keen on getting rid of Shokin, because there's also this letter that hasn't been talked about much, but I think it's just such a smoking gun that I'm always sort of flabbergasted that not more has been done about it. So there's a letter from George Kent written to the Prosecutor General's office in Ukraine, demanding that they stop investigations of these groups, and in particular, as you said just now, where they got their money from. And there's a sentence in there saying, don't investigate where the U.S. aid went. It's just, why would the charge d'affaires, the U.S. guy in Ukraine, prevent corruption investigations? It's just, of course, you kind of gave the answer there.
He is also, I've been I met George again a couple of times throughout my life. He was, when I first met him was in 2014, March, April. He came in, he was basically pushing the idea of forming the National Anti-Corruption Bureau in Ukraine. He was the godfather of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. He was involved in the State Department with law enforcement issues. So basically, he was pushing that idea to Ukraine, even though we told him, we will do it, but we have to do it our way, a constitutional way. It's going to be longer, but it's going to be more stable and workable. But he was pushing really fast. So basically, he was covering for not only the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, but for all the anti-corruption bodies and organizations, even like ANTAC, protecting them and meeting with them constantly and only listening to them. That's why he was basically behind, backing them up in every move that was made even against them.
Yeah, and exactly, and he did something else, which we recently found out with one of these drops of documents. I think this was the State Department drop last month, where we found out that George Kent was actually the New York Times leaker. He's the guy who pushed all these narratives to Ken Vogel over at the New York Times. again, I'm just sort of flabbergasted that these things are just kind of forgotten about. Whereas if the shoe was on the other foot, we'd never hear the end of it. That you have a U.S. official basically leaking his narrative to the New York Times, and the emails are quite damning. I mean, it basically says like, it didn't come from me, kind of thing. This is not good. But
I also spoke with George Kent on an often basis. So he was leaking it from the government source, and I was saying as a whistleblower, but they went after me, but George Kent is still working in the State Department, even though he was the leaker.
Yeah,
as a government official.
And you were going on the record with Kent Vogel using your name while Kent is leaking.
Right.
And is there? I mean, just going off topic, is there any communication between you and Ken anymore? I'm assuming it's over.
Oh, he wrote to me a couple of weeks ago. Like I respect him as a journalist from my side, because he broke the story in Politico. He wasn't afraid, and he still stuck to the story compared to other journalists like David Stern, who went off and didn't try to ignore there were two journalists who on Politico wrote about me in 2017, David Stern and Ken Vogel. Ken Vogel stuck to the story even though he took the heat about it, and he still stuck to it because he knew what he reported on, and that's what I respect him for.
I mean, we should also
even though he's New York Times. I told him, I don't like that you work for the New York Times, but I respect you as a journalist.
We should probably mention at this point that Kent and Jovanovic, the ambassador, had their press guy. So they have a press guy over at the embassy. They tasked him. We know this now because of the State Department drop last month. They tasked this guy with monitoring the social media of Dan Bongino, Jack Posobiec, and I think Don Jr. and someone else.
John Solomon.
John Solomon, right? So
Giuliani and everybody else. Yeah.
gives you an idea of where these people are in terms of why would they do that? I mean, these are supposedly officials. They're supposed to represent the United States, and they tell their guy, look, keep an eye on these people. I mean, it's just.
And then what I want to add, I think if it was not true what we were saying and all these people are saying, it could be proven easily and just look. We can prove whatever they're saying wrong and just nobody will listen to them. But they were afraid. That's what they were following, all these people. And that was Jack Posobiec interviewed me a couple of times. OAN interviewed me. John Solomon interviews me time to time and other people. So basically, they're afraid that the truth is coming out. And that's what they had to monitor to see how they can have to contract to what these journalists are saying. And that's the problem. They were afraid. If it was not true, nobody would listen. Nobody would care. It would just die out in a month and nobody would continue. But the story is alive for so many years because there's truth to it. And small pieces of it, time to time, the puzzles come together and it develops into a bigger story because truth, that's the main thing. That's what they were so afraid of, George Kent, Jovanovic, and the Democrats.
Right. So if we go back to our timeline. So Shokin becomes the prosecutor general. The NGOs go against him. We talked about the fact that they were not happy with him trying to figure out who funds them. We know that George Kent was telling the prosecutors not to investigate who funds them and not to investigate misuse of U.S. funds, which in and of itself is a very strange thing for him to do. But so let's go back to Shokin himself. So I've been looking everywhere, researching everywhere. I'm trying to find a case against Shokin, like he's accused of having a Swiss bank account, or he's accused of having taken 10 million, or has there ever been an investigation or a charge or anything against this guy?
No, there's no investigation, no charges, nothing against Shokin. It's just words that he's corrupt. When I used to meet with Liz Zentos in the beginning of 2016, she was the advisor to Biden, National Security Council. She would just deliver the message, Shokin needs to get fired. This was February 2016. This was January 2016. Shokin needs to get fired. Shokin needs to get fired. Deliver this message. He's trouble for the U.S., etc., etc. And I asked her a couple of times, is there any background to it? Oh, he's just corrupt. You know he's corrupt. Everybody knows that he's corrupt. Like, this is U.S. officials who have a possibility to have the U.S. Treasury follow every dollar and find out if the person does have any what fraudulent bank accounts or money transfers, etc., etc. But they don't do it. They just call him a fraud, or they just call him corrupt, and that's it. Which is really strange because there's nothing against what he did, just to investigate the cases which were not in the interest of the United States. And they would, like, for example, I didn't like what William Barr or the Supreme Court of the United States investigates, or how they handle cases on Trump, or etc. And I'm a Ukrainian official. I'm going to come out and say, you have to fire these judges, or you have to fire William Barr. How it's going to look? It's going to look terrible, right? But because the United States is giving us money, not money, but credit and loans, which we have to pay back, they tell us what to do, which is, I think, wrong. I think it's not the case, which they seem that they have the right to tell us what to do. This is not the case that a sovereign and independent country has to take, even from their allies. If we're allies, we have to be supportive of each other. And they had nothing on Mr. Shokin, from what I know of. Mr. Shokin had cases opened up against them. He filed cases after he left his office against Biden and Hunter Biden in Ukraine, which were dropped after Biden won the election, and they were dropped by the Ukrainian police and prosecutor's office. So this is the world we live in today. You can just accuse somebody, even an official, and just destroy his reputation.
Right, and it seems such an odd thing.
And Poroshenko even says that to Biden on a telephone call, that there's no not even one instance of corruption or example, but he fired him anyway.
And what Mr. Shokin told me also personally, he said, this is from his words, he said Poroshenko called him up in December and said, there's the Americans want to fire you. You have to leave. But he said, Shokin, show me something on me. If you have something on me, I will leave. And then I think in January, beginning of February, before they fire official Shokin, Poroshenko said, you have to do this for Ukraine because we will not receive our loan guarantee. Poroshenko knew about this even before Biden spoke about it publicly, said we're not going to get the money if you stay in place. And that's when Shokin he resigns, and then he gets fired officially through the parliament, et cetera, et cetera. So this is how the procedure, from Mr. Shokin's words, were that the president told him that he has to leave because of the Americans.
Right. Now, two points on that. First of all, I mean, it's such a good point about, let's assume everyone is corrupt. I mean, how is that the business of the United States, especially if you compare it to other countries where the United States sends tons of money and never tells them who to fire and who to whatever. I mean,
Iran, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Egypt. I mean, you come up with a whole bunch of countries where.
Palestine.
Yep. So, I mean, that's just a general oddity, but also specifically, I recall that George Kent in his impeachment testimony said that as soon as Lutsenko was appointed, when they had their first meeting, it's the spring of 2016, he knew immediately that Lutsenko was totally corrupt. I mean, he literally says that in his impeachment testimony. So again, first of all, it's the point you made that, oh, we'll just label them as corrupt, without specifics. Now, but aside from that, the question is, well, why was it not a problem with Lutsenko, but why is it such a huge problem with Shokin? If we're going to label them as corrupt, because Lutsenko they allowed to hang around for 3 years, even though Kent said immediately that he was corrupt.
Because he made a deal that he will drop the cases on ANTAC, which Lutsenko dropped the cases on ANTAC. He got appointed end of spring, beginning of summer 2016, and Lutsenko drops the cases of ANTAC within 3 weeks,
right
after his appointment. And then within a couple of months, he dropped the cases on Burisma in October, November, before the presidential elections in the United States, 2016.
Right.
That's why he's more likable than Shokin, because he's more cooperative.
Yeah.
And he's not independent as prosecutors should be compared to Mr. Lutsenko.
No, I think that's such a good point.
What's in a prosecutor?
You have a lot of focus has been on, was Shokin fired because he was such bad news for Burisma? He was going after Burisma and so on. And we'll get to that. I mean, there were things he was doing, but maybe the focus should not be so much on Shokin. Maybe the focus should just be on the Bidens just needing someone new, someone pliable. So, Shokin kind of neither here nor there, but we need a new guy that we can control. Whereas Shokin, we cannot control. Maybe it leads up into that. But if we can just go back to the timeline then. So we're in the summer. Payet is saying it's fine. The NGOs are saying it's not fine. We don't have any evidence of this guy having done anything wrong. But the pressure ratchets up. So there's kind of two events. The first one is in September, and Payet gives this speech where he says, the prosecutor's office really has to clean up and do something. Do you have any sort of idea where that came from, that speech, that strong
in Odessa, the speech in Odessa he gave. There was a situation I think during the summer of 2015 after within Shokin's office, not his office, but the prosecutor's office, where they some of the deputies who worked with George Kent, like Vitaly Kasko, David Sekvarelidze, who were in the White House meeting January 2016, who basically, while Shokin was on vacation, they went after people he appointed. So they were not his assistants, they were not people directly under Shokin, and they allegedly found diamonds as bribes. They never proved that those diamonds were given as bribes. They found diamonds in their safes in their office, and while they were working in the prosecutor's office. So basically, who keeps cash or diamonds in their office? Nobody, right? Like, I don't know. If you want to hide them, we're going to hide them. But they allegedly found, without any witnesses, without anything, they just saw these diamonds and they said, "Oh, this is corruption under Shokin." But they never proved that it was within Shokin, or Shokin was involved in this, or Shokin knew about this. They did this all illegally without Shokin knowing, even though they had to inform the prosecutor general, even though while he was on vacation. They did this all illegally using a SWAT team, stormed into the prosecutor's office, destroyed furniture, etc. And they came up with, this is the case that we're going to go after Shokin, the diamond prosecutor case, they called it. And they basically alleged that, even though until today, there's no court decision that this case, this is in 2015, 5 years passed, until today, there's no court decision that Shokin or even those prosecutors were involved in any corruption that they were accused of by the ANTAC people or the people who were under Shokin working with ANTAC. And until 5 years passed, no court decision, nothing that alleged that Shokin or anybody was corrupt. And that's when the troubles started for Shokin, because during that period of time, a couple months prior to that, going after ANTAC, he started going after Burisma. He opened up 4 new cases against Burisma and Zlochevsky and was investigating Hunter Biden, not only Hunter Biden, but other officials within the Burisma board of directors, because they were receiving illegal funds. The company itself was legally formed because Zlochevsky, while being Minister of Ecology, was giving himself licenses for gas development. And the company was self-legally formed. It was basically giving fraudulent money to, which was illegally brought to the company to pay all their more board members who were also U.S. Some of them were former president of Poland. Other people were Hofer Black was former deputy director CIA. One of them was Hunter Biden, and that's what the case was said. And not only Ukraine said that this money was illegal, but also the Latvian, during this investigation in the summer and until September, even the Latvian authorities wrote a letter. The Latvian Treasury Department wrote a letter to our prosecutor's office saying they believe that the money which is being transferred through Latvia to Cyprus, where Cyprus was paying to Hunter Biden, was the whole scheme directly, they were illegal money, and Ukraine has to look into it. And so this is the investigation that we're following, and this is the beginning of something that led to Shokin being fired, and he got fired. I'll tell you a bit more. Right before he got fired, what happened? That was the main development of why he got fired also.
Right, and the Latvian issue is, again, one of those completely underreported issues here. The guy who wrote the letter, the guy who did the investigating on the Latvian side, is a guy called Burkhans. So I looked at this guy's sort of whole record, whatever there was. I mean, this is a guy in super good standing. You know, he's a guy who he goes over and talks with the EU. He goes to all kinds of conferences. This is not like some, shady guy or whatever. This was completely independent of the Ukrainians. It's not like the Ukrainians asked the Latvians, do something or political reasons. It has nothing to do with that. This is the Latvians on their own who have banks, and stuff goes through their banks and goes into Cyprus and wherever. And they're like, hey, we picked up some very suspicious things here. Can you help us? So the Latvians asked the Ukrainians and not the other way around. Completely independent of anything else that's going on, and obviously with no politics involved, because what's Latvia got to do with it? What's this guy Burkhan's got to do with it? So no, I think that's such an important point, that it's not just Shokin, it's not just someone's hearsay or whatever. This is a completely different stream of investigating the Bidens as well as Burisma in terms of these payments. Okay, we got Payet, and as you say, there was more pressure. So Payet said, we need to clean up. This is September. You mentioned there were 4 investigations opened against Burisma. So we're talking in 2015, right?
Yes. And
okay.
It was also, there were a couple of investigations, two or three opened in 2014, right after Maidan in Ukraine, in March 2014. And then there were additional 4 under Shokin in 2015.
Right, because we know Burisma had their assets seized, or the head guy there, Nikolai, had his assets seized in February of 2016. But in order for that to happen, there had to have been a process that played out ahead of that. Right. So they must have known, let me phrase that as a question. We know that on November 2nd, 2015, the Hunter's liaison with Burisma, a guy called Požarsky, wrote this email that we found on Hunter's hard drive. And that email is, probably the biggest smoking gun in the entire affair, because he tells Hunter to shut down the cases. These cases need to be shut down. It's just written there in black and white. So do you think Burisma knew at that point that these cases were ongoing and that things were getting serious? This is November.
Of course, they have Burisma from working after with Blue Star and understanding how because when I started working with Blue Star, I didn't know the old politics of all this. It was that they had a lot of ears on the ground within the prosecutor's office, basically leaking information, what was going on to them before even it got into the press or even public. So they all were focused on what was going on and knew all the details. So they already having those details, they would cooperate with their people who they employed, like Blue Star, Hunter Biden, other people, to help them stop this, and not only them, but other people around the world or in Ukraine to pressure the president of Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how they worked. So this is all interconnected. It's not like didn't they know about it, then they just found out and then they started acting. No, they knew about it prior. They would act on it before even though it would come out. So that's how the operation was.
No, and that makes perfect sense. It also explains the tone of that email, because leading up to that, the emails are kind of friendly, and Hunter goes on some trip with them somewhere, and they arrange visas and they arrange flights for them and whatever. And then suddenly you got that email, November 2nd, 2015. It's like, and it's the deliverables emails. He said, we'd agreed on these deliverables, and these deliverables were not Hunter helping them with, corporate governance or some stuff like that. The deliverables were make the cases go away. And again, that's specifically set out in that email. And so what we know after that is that a few weeks later, so December 7th, 2015, Biden, the father, Joe, is in Ukraine. And that's the first time that this demand to fire Shokin is articulated from the U.S. side, where because when Payet talked about it, he just said we need to, improve things and so on. But the specific demand came on December 7th when Joe Biden went to Ukraine. So we have a very short time span between the deliverables email and Biden making that demand. Now, obviously, we don't know what Biden and Hunter talked about and so on, but I mean, it's a pretty short time span between one thing happening and the next.
Yeah. And the problem is for Biden is that Shokin still stands his ground and said, I will not drop the case.
Right.
Because he has enough evidence in his pocket or under his sleeve and enough cards to play and say, I can go after Zlochevsky, I can go after Burisma, and that's what he does. And later on, after Biden comes to Ukraine, pressures Poroshenko pressures Shokin that he might be fired. Shokin continues, and in February they seize Zlochevsky's assets. Not only they seize the assets virtually, but they also physically. I have evidence right now. I found over my emails document that and this also was in Ukrainian press at the time. Now these articles are not online. I have all copies of them with IP addresses and everything, and all the other documents that they seize physically. They come to Zlochevsky's house in Ukraine, and they basically seize it physically, his car, his house. They come after it, and that's a week later or 2 weeks later. Shokin gets so much pressure, he gets fired or he resigns on his own.
Right. That's such an important point, because when we've all seen the video of Biden, talking about the blackmail, about the $1 billion, fire the prosecutors, or don't prosecutor, or don't get the money. I don't think that was done in December. I think in December Biden just said fire the prosecutor.
Yeah, so this was done in February, I think. February.
Right, that's right. So it was kind of ratcheted up. So the quid pro quo part, that came later. So first, just do as I say, and then they didn't do, and then so Biden had to find.
Shokin put more pressure from his side on Zlochevsky, on Burisma, and that's when Biden says what he says afterwards, the quid pro quo, the pressuring of the president, because that's when I think there's that to get what happened between Prigozhin, Burisma, and Hunter Biden, and their communication or something, what happened between them. That's the key part to prove that this happened more, because there's already proof. Right. Shokin goes after Zlochevsky. He freezes everything that he has in Ukraine, even though it wasn't frozen before. Now he has enough evidence to go after. There's a court decision. He doesn't do it on his own. There's a court ruling. It's all filed within the court system. Zlochevsky, everything's frozen. Then Biden basically is in Ukraine, pressures Poroshenko with quid pro quo with $1 billion to fire Shokin. That's when Shokin gets fired. And then everything drops. The Zlochevsky's case falls apart. Lutsenko, 6 months afterwards, I think he basically he closes the case, which is really good for everybody.
There's also Fool, do you want to jump in here for the January 19th meeting? You've done a lot of work on that. That sort of fits between.
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's kind of a lot of, I don't know. We don't really know why that meeting happened. I guess it's not really exactly clear, but we know that that Biden went in December 2015 to Ukraine, and then like you were saying before, you were talking to Liz Zentos, and she was, I don't know if that was before the meeting or after, that she was pressuring. Okay, that's after the meeting. Okay, great. So I guess the meeting's kind of depicted as sort of like a training session or something like that for the prosecutors to come to America, to the White House, and work with the FBI and NABU. And so basically, how is that meeting set up? Because I know you have documents and stuff about that.
Yeah, it was done basically. I think Fox News reported about it and other people reported about it. But how it happened is, they came officially for the DOJ, Department of Justice training program, and because I was working in the prosecutor's office prior to that, and this is me working already in the Embassy of Ukraine in Washington as a third secretary overseeing political issues and the elections, but the ambassador put me on as a former prosecutorial worker or advisor to the prosecutor general to work with the prosecutors who came. And we had a hard time getting into a lot of those meetings. We got into the White House meeting. I was present in some of the meetings. Our Ukrainian delegation, prosecutors, were meeting with the FBI, but a lot of the other meetings I was blocked, and our embassy was blocked out of, which is really strange, because you have a delegation. I'm going to get to the general meeting, White House meeting itself, but just a story to it. Our delegation, any delegation from any country comes to, which is a government, not opposition leaders, not somebody from the opposition where they don't want the government to get involved. But our government officials, or any government officials, come somewhere, they always have a representative from the embassy with them. And our delegation was not against they were happy that we will be involved in those meetings. And I was there. I didn't even need a translator. I speak English. So I was just there quietly listening and then reporting back to the embassy. And what happened is they knew that I would report back to the embassy, so they blocked us. I was present in 2 or 3 meetings out of the whole schedule they had. They blocked us from every other meeting they had with the deputy head director of FBI. They blocked me from other meetings within the FBI and Department of Justice, which was really strange. We had to bring people on board from us from the White House to help us to get into some of the meetings. We got into 3, which one of them was the White House meeting itself. So this was also really strange. Why were they covering up and not letting us involved, which is also, I think, a bit politically illegal. And not illegal by law, but politically illegal. And the January meeting itself was really strange because there was present Department of Justice officials, there was present Eric Chiminello, Liz Zentos, other White House officials from National Security Council, basically all connected to Biden directly. There were present the head of NABU, Artem Sitnik, the head of the head special prosecutor Holodnitsky, and there was also Deputy Prosecutor Sekvarilidze, the Georgian guy who got hired with the reforms to the Prosecutor General's office, and they were all connected with ANTAC, and most of them were all talking about how to fire Shokin. That Shokin needs to get fired because he's not letting them work. And you have his basically.
Was this at the meeting or before?
At the meeting itself at the White House, and they're telling the White House officials to fire Shokin, and basically the Department of Justice officials are speaking for them. There was a couple of guys also came from Ukraine, from the U.S. Embassy, who work with the Department of Justice, and they started to speak for them and saying what Ukraine is having problems with Burisma, et cetera, that this needs to get done, this needs to get fired, and this is how they spoke about other stuff, but this is the main topic they discussed about Shokin, and that he's a problem, and basically this is the Ukrainian side legalizing what Biden was asking Poroshenko to do, to fire the Prosecutor General Shokin by his employees, by people who are under him and working for him.
Right. So I'm just going to call him David because I can't pronounce his last name. So David, and then there's another deputy prosecutor, Casco, right? At the same time,
not president. Casco was not president.
He wasn't there, but he was still a deputy prosecutor at that time, right? Because I remember he was invited to this. So
he was not in Washington, that's for sure.
Right. So David basically, he was, like you said before, with the Diamond Prosecutor stuff. So he was kind of exhibiting a power move and trying to get Shokin ousted as well. At the same time, while the White House is. So they're working together to get this done. It kind of sounds like.
Yes, they were working together because, first of all, David Sekvarilidze wanted to become the new prosecutor. He was
exactly
thriving for that position, but because he just got his Ukrainian citizenship a couple months prior, and he was Georgian, not Ukrainian, that would not politically come out right, and he would not be supported by the parliament. So then they chose Lutsenko, who had no prosecutorial background or no even law degree, to become the Prosecutor General of Ukraine.
Now, coming back to that meeting, you're absolutely right. It strikes me when you have sort of intergovernmental contacts, that seems to be a huge breach of protocol, that you just sort of bypass one of the governments. So it's like the U.S. basically just dealt directly with these individuals, bypassing the embassy, which is, as you say, it's a very, very strange thing. So when you say kind of they organize it, you mentioned Ciaramella, you mentioned a bunch of people in DOJ. You think what ties all these people together is Biden, is the office of vice president, or
yes, especially the National Security Council is the office of the vice president. That's who the people who were at that meeting from the White House.
And because he was running Ukraine, and Liz Zentos and Ciaramella were the people at that desk, basically.
Yeah, and then Ciaramella used to handle Ukraine. I did not know who he was before all this stuff came up on him, and then I actually found out later from my emails that I actually met him once or twice.
Yeah, because which is interesting, which is a side story, because when Ciaramella was named, which was actually me who did it, I found out about that meeting and I looked at the White House logs and I saw Ciaramella was there. So I DM'd you and I go, was Eric Ciaramella at this meeting? I think he's the whistleblower. And you go, I don't remember. And then you looked at your emails and you go, yeah, he was there, which is interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even remember him as like I didn't know him. So I knew him with Liz Santos. I used to work with her while she was working with the Ukrainian U.S. Embassy in Kiev.
Yeah, and that's actually how our relationship sort of started when I figured that out.
Yeah. You found the key.
Yeah.
You did. In terms of the meetings you were allowed to attend, how deep did they go into the whole Shokin story, or was that mentioned at all that he needed to get fired and so on?
They were like the White House didn't want to talk about the Burisma case itself overall, because I think even the Department of Justice wanted to talk about it in depth with them, but they did not want to discuss it. They said, "Oh, let's email it to us or something." They didn't want to discuss in depth, but it still did talk about how Shokin was bad and how he needs to get fired because he's basically blocking a lot of other anti-corruptional issues without any evidence, and the Department of Justice was all on that, backing our prosecutors and even talking more than our prosecutors within that meeting, saying for them. I was shocked that like our prosecutors hardly even they spoke, but the Department of Justice was speaking for them, which is like really strange. It was not sovereign at all. I reported that to our ambassador and to the embassy back right away. That's why they didn't want me there. And during other meetings, they talked about Shokin a couple of times, but basically because I was there, they did not discuss it in depth. I think they didn't want me to hear because they knew I worked for him. They knew that I worked for that government, and even though our ambassador offered somebody else to work on their team, the Department of Justice and the U.S. government did not let them join instead of me to be part of the delegation. So that was really, really strange.
And so soon after the Shokin seizes these assets, do you think there's a connection there, or is that that's separate? That's just because the investigation had gotten to that point?
I think there was enough evidence he had already. Yeah. That's when I think Hunter Biden and Pozharsky talk. That's when I think there was enough evidence to go after Zlochevsky Burisma, right, to have Pozharsky write a direct email. Pozharsky, I know him. He's a really he tries to be as secure as possible, but for him to write an open letter like that over an email, that's a thing where things start to get heated up. And that was when enough evidence were in the hands of the prosecutor's office of Ukraine to go after Burisma. And Hunter and Biden come to Ukraine asking to fire Shokin, or Shokin is corrupt, heats up the process by having Shokin focus on this topic and mostly on this topic and go after Burisma and show that he has enough evidence to go after him. And he asks if the president of Ukraine has enough evidence to go after Shokin. If there's evidence to fire him. If no, I will continue my work. But then the president pressures him just because of the money issue. Ukraine needed money. We have and still have an ongoing war with Russia, and there's not enough funds. And this loan guarantee for us was needed more than ever. That's steps down and says, I will not be interfering if this is the case. So basically, comes out as a patriot instead of, I don't want to back anybody up. I say I worked with Shokin for only a couple of months, but he comes out here as stepping down and basically on his own rather than just being pressured out and being thrown out of the office.
It's such a good point about Pozharsky, the Hunter's liaison at Burisma, because when you look at his emails, he's a very professional guy. I mean, it's always businesslike. He's guarded, as you mentioned, the 2014 ones leading into 2015. Very careful. He sometimes says things that he's not going to discuss it here. He says that he's not going to discuss it, so he knows not to discuss it. And again, just very, very professional, very businesslike, very guarded, all of those things. And suddenly there's boom, there's this bomb he drops, like, we had deliverables, make sure the cases go away. So clearly.
And what I want to add, Pozharsky still works with Blue Star for Burisma and still cooperates and comes to Washington quite often and goes to Blue Star to talk about business as usual. Nothing changed. Sorry.
That's something. He just, when you read all his other emails, the guy is just a thorough professional. So for him to sort of snap, but I don't think it's snapping. It's actually, it was done on purpose, but just for him to get angry in that way and express it that way, obviously the pressure had ratcheted up on the Ukraine side. So maybe Hunter had overpromised what he can deliver. It didn't happen. So November 2015, where are the deliverables? So it's just such a striking email, especially if you look at it in the whole chain of emails, that you suddenly sort of get that. And he doesn't, as you say, he's very unguarded in that email. There's nothing he doesn't, that he hides or whatever. It's like, this is what we agreed, this is what you're going to do. And then a few weeks later, it starts getting done. So
Hans, that same day, which after that email, that same day, Hunter Biden immediately calls Amos Hochstein's office and was like, we need to talk. And then at some point, Hochstein and Hunter meet, and I'm assuming Burisma is the topic, and Hochstein's an advisor to Biden, and I'm sure that got shuffled to him.
Yeah, he was the contact person, from what I know from talking to Blue Star. He was the contact person for the stuff within the State Department, energy stuff for Blue Star and other things. It delivered to Biden as when he was the vice president. Hochstein, he was the contact person. If something needed to get delivered to the vice president, that's Biden. He would everything we brought to him, and then he would bring to the vice president, and that was the filter for everybody else.
There's another completely unconnected story out in San Francisco that also appears on Hunter's hard drive, but it sort of shows you exactly that modus operandi that you just mentioned, that Hunter has some dealings with some guy out in San Francisco. And the guy out in San Francisco, I'm not going to mention his name here because we don't know, if he did anything wrong or whatever. We just don't know. But it's in the Hunter email. So this guy wants something from Joe Biden. And Hunter kind of makes it clear that the way to go is you go through someone else. So, it's not like Hunter phones up Joe and says, get this done, even though that might have happened, or it might happen sort of at the last instance. I think he actually mentioned something like along the lines of, we need to go through a process before I can tell Dad, or, something like along those lines. So first,
legalize it.
That's right. First, it needs to come from state or whoever, in this case, Hochstein. And then maybe in February or so, we don't know. Obviously, it would be lovely if we did. Hunter pulls the trigger and says, no, look, you got to make it happen. And that's when the $1 billion thing comes up.
Yes. So
again, we don't know if that Hunter-Joe conversation took place, but what we do know is that all of a sudden, the whole thing was really pushed to maximum volume, like $1 billion or get rid of this guy, or no $1 billion.
Yeah.
So tell us more about that. What you know about the actual firing? So we're now in March of 2016.
Basically, from what Mr. Shokin told me, it was he got called up to the president and said, it's the matter of national security for Ukraine, the money or you, and that's how he leaves his office. He got fired, but he resigned to show. He said he agreed to leave the office without any fight, even though he had everything already ready. And Zlochevsky's assets were frozen in Ukraine. Everything was frozen for him, and that's when he leaves the office. And he has, during that period of time from March until end of May, beginning of June, there's an acting prosecutor who doesn't have as much power politically or legally even to go after things. Mr. Sevruk, he's Shokin's person. That's when Blue Star gets involved. I meet with Blue Star in March or February 2016 in Washington. They come to the embassy to talk to the ambassador. The ambassador doesn't come to the meeting. He doesn't like Blue Star for some reason. So he doesn't come to the meeting with them. And he asks me and his DCM Shular to come to the meeting. So that's when I get introduced. And they jump on me, and because I used to work in the prosecutor's office, let's meet, let's have dinner. And we have dinner a week later, and they asked me to organize a meeting for them with the lawyer from who was in the meeting from New York. I forgot the lawyer. His name is Blue Sally Painter, Karen Tramontano, and the lawyer come to Kiev to meet with the acting prosecutor general, Mr. Sevruk, and they introduce themselves as the former advisor to the President of the United States, Bill Clinton. That's where Karen Tramontano used to be deputy chief of staff, and Sally Painter used to be advisor to Bill Clinton. and they talk with the acting prosecutor about bringing him to Washington, introducing him to Newland, introducing him to the prosecutor general, the attorney general of the United States, the head of FBI. Basically, that's how they wanted to learn people of interest to work with them. Basically, a free lobby.
Right.
And then they find out that there's going to be a new prosecutor general. Mr. Savruk is not going to stay. And they say, oh, let's pause this and let's work with the new one. And they asked me then to arrange them a meeting with the new prosecutor general, Lutsenko, which I do in June of 2016. And through my channels, I'm already back in Kiev, but I do it basically while I'm in Washington, still do the process. And they meet the new prosecutor general, Lutsenko, and they offer him the same thing. And they offer him to come to Washington, work with them, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when Mr. Lutsenko gets blocked by the U.S. Embassy saying, oh, you should not work with Blue Star, because the U.S. Embassy didn't want him to go to Washington and work with people over the embassy. They wanted them to work through the embassy. So that's where the fight starts with Blue Star and the embassy saying, Ivanovich saying, no, we don't want you to go to Washington with Blue Star. We will arrange everything for you if you want to go. And then that's their work continues. But this is the little process after Shokin. Well, Shokin got fired. What happened afterward, from what I personally saw or witnessed in communication and organizing meetings.
Right. The whole Blue Star thing is another manifestation of this this modus operandi, where Hunter doesn't go in and sort of flick the switch or whatever. He does it indirectly. So soon after he started working for Burisma, he told Burisma, look, we need to hire these middlemen. He didn't call them middlemen. He called them, they're lobbyists, basically. They're Democrat fixers, whatever you want to call them, Blue Star. But so Burisma had to hire them. There's some interesting emails as well about Burisma not being so happy that it's going to cost a whole bunch of extra money apart from all the money that they're paying Hunter. But Hunter insisted on it, so they hired the Blue Star people. But it then works exactly the way you said, because then a Blue Star can go and be the front of this, and Hunter can sort of stay in the background. Number one, by Hunter being there, they know exactly what to do without it having to be spelled out. And number two, Hunter is kind of an insurance policy in terms of if Blue Star doesn't get its way, then, or whoever doesn't get its way, then Hunter can still step in and just tell Joe what to do.
And Blue Star also worked with Hochstein very closely on matters that needed to be related to the vice president or anything else within the State Department. They could not go against George or behind George Kent's back or Ivanovich. They went through Hochstein, and then that's what they did meetings in Kiev when they used to come to Kiev and meet with Burisma officials and Pozharsky. They dealt with Pozharsky directly and Zlochevsky directly. They helped them basically not only deal with Hunter Biden, but build Burisma's image abroad by getting Atlantic Council, the Democratic think tank in Washington, backing up Burisma, even though it was corrupt as hell. Sorry for my language. And backing them up by Atlantic Council getting paid $200,000 a year, having the former U.S. ambassador to Kiev backing them up also within the Atlantic Council board. Then Sally Painter joining the Atlantic Council board and also basically protecting Burisma that way, having informational warfare from all levels, cleaning up Burisma for them to do business and buying U.S. equipment. Burisma not only did business with Hunter Biden, they bought U.S. equipment for oil and gas development in Ukraine, one of the largest oil drills or gas drills in Europe, which costed them like $40 million. So basically, they bought it from Texas, and the company is under investigation, and there's no issues with them. And this is how they dealt with business. So it was all interconnected. Hunter Biden, State Department, Blue Star, going to the vice president in Ukraine. We called him Uncle Joe.
Yeah.
That was his nickname in the Ukrainian government for Joe Biden.
That sounds about right.
It's a more sophisticated scheme than is sometimes sort of portrayed as, where they employ Hunter. Hunter goes and does all these things. There's, as you say, there's more layers involved and things like that. So, but as a lawyer looking at it, I mean, short of Hunter having a tape of Hunter telling Joe, look, they're paying me money to make the problems go away, go and fire this guy. Short of that particular tape, we have about as much evidence as we could possibly have. I mean, the timeline, everything fits the way it escalates over time. Then, you know, especially with the Wojcicki email where he says deliverables, suddenly Joe's over there trying to get the deliverables, doesn't get them, so he ratchet up with the first they invite over these prosecutors, kind of bypassing the embassy again to create the pressure. But then Biden ties in the $1 billion with his demand, and suddenly his demand, you know, comes true. And then lastly, right as soon as this guy is fired, Shokin is fired, Blue Star is over there trying to talk to the new guy. So
Yeah.
it all fits together. But I think that story needed to be told, and I'm glad we sort of went through it. To sort of get the 30,000 foot view of things, number one, but also then to zoom in on particular instances to sort of get the whole picture of what happened here. And it's just a shame that, you know, media never did any of this. No one, Rudy tried, as you said, to get at these things, but it's more than worthy of investigating. I mean, there's so much going on here. And it's just a shame that we got to this place and you're in the position you are now, because of having spoken up about these things. And even if you don't, you know, believe half of them, there's so much there that, you know, at least you ought to look into them.
And first of all, like when I talk about it, I talk about that I have evidence, emails, and other documents backing everything I say, or most of everything I say with all my words that needs to be checked and rechecked and combined and at least investigated. That's what Donald Trump, when he was the president of the United States, by calling Zelensky, asked, let's cooperate, work with my attorney general, and have your prosecutor's office work and cooperate. And there's work on this case. This is what they wanted. An investigation, a proper one. That's what everybody needed, and he still needs until today. And nobody even offered that to the people of Ukraine and people in the United States before this election. And I think, and I hope there's going to be some investigation afterwards that the U.S. is a free democratic country, and there's going to be a special something that will lead this investigation. But I doubt it as of now. And what I'm seeing, how the Democrats are acting ruthlessly, they just ignore any rule of law. They just do what they have to do for their own sake. But as I said, I'm in this situation right now, for telling the truth. And I just want to add, I was in the U.S. under a student visa. I was in the U.S. under diplomatic visa. I was in the U.S. under a family diplomatic visa. I was in the U.S. under a regular tourist visa. No issues at all. I was rechecked with everything. I was there in 4 years. I was telling the truth. And a week before Biden becomes the president, they put sanctions on me. And this is what we have to deal with today, the normal reality of our Western values, which even we in Ukraine value. We will still continue. And there's good that there's journalists and investigators like you who are actually digging into this stuff and are more sophisticated than top media, which are controlled by a lot of others' influences, and which I think is not right. I think the world is going to change now to something more. To the media, the big media is going to go away soon because they are all trying to not tell the truth and have a narrative behind. People understand that. Most of the people do.
Well, thanks for coming on.
And people think that Ukraine is corrupt, but look at us. I mean, it's a joke. And is there any way you could can you send this to maybe like the president and try to get Hans and I sanctioned by Ukraine, if that would be possible? Just send this video.
Hey, I just ask questions. Now, thanks for coming on. But it's so true that the media is responsible for so much of this because they didn't report it, and it's not that difficult to find. I mean, Full and I, we're just two guys, you know. We just like search around and find these stories. Like for instance, the fact that all these assets were seized. That's on the internet. So, okay, you say, well, maybe it's a fake site or whatever. So then you go to archive and you look at, did this page exist back in the day? And then you find, wow, it existed. All of this is true. And you can do that for all these things that we talked about today. You know, it's not that difficult, but it doesn't happen. I am kind of hopeful a little bit, and if there's any silver lining with Biden now, it's that if the focus isn't on Trump, if it is on Biden, then maybe we have a better chance of getting to the bottom of these things, or at least getting them out. I think we got to the bottom of them pretty well just now in the past hour, but in terms of getting them out, because as long as Trump was around, that wasn't ever going to happen, because the entire focus, all the oxygen was always with Trump, and the media liked it that way, especially after they caricatured him. But if that can shift to Biden, maybe there's a chance of getting this out.
Yes. The main thing is the people of Ukraine and the United States need to hear the truth.
Exactly.
Maybe there's nothing there. That's what they have to investigate and come out in a court decision saying there was no corruption. All of this was just conspiracy theories, or this was just not enough to have a case of corruption filed on Hunter Biden, or anybody else involved. Or they should come out and say, yes, we did investigate this. This all interconnects. We have more documents. There is corruption, and we will investigate further on, or we have a court decision. This is what we need to know. I don't want to make a political statement. I don't want to continue this, but I will, because they went after me because they were afraid. And I'm going to continue going after the truth, and that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Fantastic.
I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for coming on, Andrii. And unless you have any more questions, Hans, we can probably wrap it up there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that was a great session. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll end it at this. I'll always consider Andrii the Ukraine whistleblower, and Eric Charamella can hide under a rock, which he's been doing for the last year or two or whatever. All right, man. You guys have a great rest of your Saturday. I'm sure it's probably getting late there in Ukraine, Andrii.
Oh, it's 7:15.
There we go. All right. Well,
Yeah.
have a fantastic day, and see you later.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
See you later, guys. Yeah.
See you, man.